ladies and gentlemen, to a new episode of Africa Today, where we get you the latest news and events taking place on the African scene. And we will start off with our major top stories and reports. West Africa is hit by its worst food crisis in a decade, with 27 million people going hungry. More details in this report.
United Nations humanitarian agencies warned that 48 million people in West and Central Africa face acute food insecurity in the coming months, a 10-year high spurred by insecurity, climate shocks, COVID-19 and high prices. West and Central Africa has faced increasing risks caused by higher temperatures and erratic rainfall. War in Ukraine has contributed to food and fertilizer shortages in one of the world's poorest regions. The number of people without regular access to safe and nutritious food is projected to hit 48 million during the June-August lean season, according to a regional food security analysis presented by the UN's World Food Programme. That is driven in part of the plight of countries in the semi-arid Sahel region, south of the Sahara Desert, including Mali and Burkina Faso. Around 16.5 million children under 5 are set to face acute malnutrition this year, according to the analyst, which said the area impacted by food shortages would likely spread long term.
And in South Africa, police evicted more than 100 asylum seekers camping outside the UN Commissioner for Refugees offices in Pretoria. The story.
South African police evicted more than 100 asylum seekers camping for over 3 years outside the UN High Commissioner for Refugees offices in Pretoria. They began living in makeshift tents pitched on sidewalks outside the UNHCR regional offices, asking to be relocated to other countries after a spate of violence in 2019. Pretoria municipality, which said the refugees were posing a health hazard living without water or toilets last week, secured a high court order to remove them. The court documents say that the refugees will be evicted and taken to the Lindela Center, at a temporary holding center for undocumented migrants who are earmarked for deportation to their countries of origin. Scores of people, officers led by the Sheriff's Department, carried out the eviction with the aid of immigration and other officers. Using a loudhailer, State Attorney Cobus Major warned the migrants that they will be arrested. The UNHCR spokeswoman said that they are asking that we transport them to a refugee camp in another country, but this is outside of our mandate.
And moving on to health, African countries are lining up to approve a new vaccine for malaria, with 20 million doses available for them to buy this year. Let's have a closer look.
African countries are lining up to approve a new vaccine for malaria, with 20 million doses available for them to buy this year. This week, Nigeria's regulatory authority has joined Ghana in supporting the new R21 vaccine, making them the first countries globally to do so. This vaccine was developed by Oxford University scientists and manufactured by the Serum Institute of India. African countries that do not have extensive resources for drug regulations have previously relied on the UN agency to initially review new medicines. At present, there is a lack of public access to comprehensive information regarding the malaria vaccine's outcomes in large-scale trials. Additionally, it remains uncertain how low-income countries will afford the cost of the vaccination. However, the urgency of the addressing of the disease that killed more than 600,000 people annually, most of them children under the age of 5 in Africa south of the Sahara, and recent efforts to enhance drug oversight in the region are changing the process. The World Health Organization stated in a high-level meeting this week that regulatory authorities from at least 10 African countries are currently examining trial data to evaluate the vaccine. It is anticipated that additional countries will grant approval for the vaccine in the next few weeks.
Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, and we're delighted to be joined over the phone by Dr. Raouf Gaafar, political analyst. Good afternoon, sir.
Good afternoon to you, my dear.
Dr. Ghaffar, a fragmented internal market has long hampered trade among African nations. Now the African Continental Free Trade Agreement will change a lot. How do you see the new agreement and its implementation, and how will it benefit the African countries and the African continent with regard to trade exchange and removing barriers between African states?
Well, you said it. The problem was the communication as far as movement of passengers and goods and trade is concerned. Now, with the agreement signed, then the free movement will facilitate the whole process. I mean, goods coming from, we know that some African countries are enclosed. They don't have beaches, they don't overlook seas. So the movement would be much easier from country to country. It will, once again, reduce the time of transit. It will reduce the time of transport. It would reduce the cost of transport and will help increase the bilateral relations, economical I'm talking, between the countries, and will, again, make it much easier for countries to cooperate on all levels. So, of course, signing such agreement is very important for the development of Africa, will ensure sustainable development because it will continue over the years and ultimately will lead into the common market of Africa, if we can call it, or the African Union as economic power in some years to go, but there is always a first step. I think that this free trade agreement is one step in the way of achieving a full-size economic complementation.
Right. Sir, the agreement will not only reduce tariffs and other barriers, but it will also work on e-commerce and intellectual property rights. How do you see this?
Absolutely. This is the trend. This is the future. As we all know, Africa is a young continent. The big majority of the population are young, and therefore they are more acceptable to modern technology, etc., which will make e-commerce the future, and therefore the improvement in such relations between different countries will help develop the e-commerce. And as I said, we are a young continent, therefore the IT is the future and the e-commerce is the future, and I think it will develop very quickly in this environment.
Right, sir. How would you view Egypt's keenness on the success of the African Free Trade Agreement, especially that Egypt was one of the first countries to ratify the agreement in 2019?
Egypt has always looked to Africa as the future, whether it is a market for the Egyptian product, whether it represents a very lucrative partner in different countries. We have seen a lot of Egyptian firms working and implementing and executing projects in different African countries. We have seen exchange of know-how and expertise between Egypt and African countries. I mean, Egypt has always been playing a role as a big sister of all African countries, and it will remain doing that. So no problem. We are benefiting, and it's a win-win situation on all sides.
Right. Sir, the World Bank has outlined the total revenues that will. Right, sir. That the total revenues that will be gained by the agreement or through the application of the agreement is around $450 billion. How far do you think this is the fact, and what are the main challenges that will be facing the implementation of the agreement?
Well, I mean, Africa needs all the funds, all the financing that is available. And I'm sure the World Bank has allocated the amount you just mentioned to Africa. I think this should be the beginning, and amount should increase. And the Egyptian, the African countries can assimilate more and more and are ready with the resources to utilize the financing they get in long-term projects and infrastructure projects, and so you name it. Yes, we need the financing, and I think that the figure you mentioned is a very humble figure regarding the real needs of the African countries, and I'm sure that the World Bank will look differently once it starts working in Africa.
Well, sir, how far do you think the African Free Trade Agreement implementation will work on boosting the African economy?
100%. As I said, it will move goods from one country to the other very quickly and without red tape and without complications. Going back to Egypt, I mean, Egypt is the door for Africa towards Europe and Asia. And I think Egypt was aware of this fact, and that is why a lot of areas and zones, like the Suez Canal Economic Zone and what have you, have been established to be the hub of market between different states, different countries, and Africa. So I am sure that this free trade agreement will help a win-win situation between inter-African commerce, and in the same time between Africa and the other parts of the world.
Right. Well, I would like to thank you, Dr. Raouf Ghaffar, our political analyst. Many thanks for your insight, sir. And dear viewers, thank you, sir. Dear viewers, that brings us to the end of this edition of Africa Today. Many thanks for watching, and stay tuned for more coming up here on Nile TV International.